What's up, guys? We got another Deck Daddies today. I have, of course, two brothers from the West Coast. I'll let them introduce themselves, but two players that played in this year's Fanzy UOP, the Budokai Tenkaichi event. Both played in multiple events online as well, and I think they've also played in many Panini Z and some fancy events. But I'll let them introduce themselves. Go ahead, guys.
Yeah, hey, I'm Eric Johnson, otherwise known as Dinkelberg. Yeah, Henry and I live here in Los Angeles. Been playing this game since I was probably about 14 years old, playing the old score game. Went to Comic-Con way back in the day and played there, so that was fun, and started to get back into it with the Panini Z. So,
Nice. And then, of course, our other guest today.
Yeah, I'm Henry Johnson, and yeah, I've been playing with my brother since he got me into it in like set two. Yeah, right at the beginning of set two. And yeah, we've pretty much played since then. We took a little bit of a break when Pansy died, but besides that, we've
Yeah.
been pretty steady on it.
So, Eric, what kind of decks do you like to play?
so I like to go to extremes when it comes to what decks I'm playing. So I like to play either something that's like really, really aggro or something that's like really, really stasis. I don't like things that are in between. So either I like to play decks where I can either, win in one combat or decks that are really stasis and just kind of progress as the game goes on and advance, one, preferably more than one win cons.
Which I did notice you play. You played a lot of the Knowledge Piccolo, is what I've seen you play. I think every time on Octagon there.
Yeah. So recently, I've been playing a lot of Knowledge Piccolo. I've also been playing a lot of Ruthless Majin Vegeta. So that's kind of the other side with
Hmm.
the aggro. So just kind of started to have more success with the Knowledge Piccolo. So started to play that a little bit more towards the end of this season.
Henry, what about you? What have you been? What have you find yourself playing?
I like everything. My favorite styles are definitely blue and red, and I used to like black a lot more. I don't really play much orange, but yeah, I play most. I'll play whatever I'm feeling. Um, but in my head, I like the idea of decks that can win multiple ways a lot more. But then I find as I play them more, I feel like it's better for me to just go all in one win con. So I tend to play decks that win one way, maybe two, and yeah,
Okay,
whatever I'm feeling.
fair enough. So with that said, oop, I got the wrong thing here, but I guess with that said, we'll go into the whole, when you're deck building, right? I might have sent you guys the wrong questions, but when you're deck building, all right. So we know that there's a lot of like ratios of deck building involved, like blocks to text to setting cards to platinum cards. Do you find yourself, now granted, you both said that, like, kind of said that you had a good variety of things that you played. In Eric's case, he's more two polar opposites. Seems like Henry, you just cover the whole spectrum. So maybe just some examples. When you're building your decks, are there like certain ratios that you're looking for in terms of numbers? Like I always run X number of blocks. I always run X number of events. I always shoot for this many planning cards in my stasis decks. Eric, I'm curious what your answers to that one.
Yeah, so I mean, it depends. It depends on the type of deck. If I'm running a deck where the blocks are really strong, then I'll generally try to include more blocks. Obviously, generally at a minimum, try to run at least three energy blocks, and at least five physical blocks at a minimum. But I like to include more blocks if they're gonna really advance my win con. If they're gonna gain me a lot of anger, then I'll bump those blocks up because I like because blocks can be really strong. So um, yeah, that's pretty much it for blocks, I guess.
What about other types of cards? Is there like when you're building your aggro deck, do you like shoot for like a heavy attack? Do you shoot for like planning? Like what's any numbers on those?
Yeah, I mean, right now it's I feel like the decks that are most successful are the decks that really try to do specifically what they're trying to do without a lot of tech. In the past, I've included a lot more tech, cards like Wall Breaker, um, Tug of War, things like that. But right now, I feel like you really kind of have to go all out for your win con, what your deck is trying to do. So not so much including a lot of tech these days.
All right. Well, what about you, Henry? Do you find yourself building like certain ratios? Do you find yourself any that apply to you? Do you have a set building path?
With some decks, I mean, in an aggro deck, I obviously want to build more attacks, and in a defensive deck, more events and planning cards and stuff. But like I said, it greatly depends on the deck. If I'm playing, a really aggressive Broly, I want to have a lot of attacks, so I always have cards to reveal. If I'm playing a really slow, Namekian deck or black deck, I want to run a lot of blocks and events. And I mean, for blocks, I sort of tend to try for 5 and 5, maybe 6 and 6, but it varies greatly on decks. Sometimes I'll only have like 8 blocks in total, and sometimes I'll have like 15. But yeah, it varies. The only thing I really look at the numbers for is endurance. I love me some endurance. I'll put as much endurance in a deck as possible, and that's probably my worst habit. Is I try to stick as much endurance in there as possible. I don't really look at the total endurance count. I look at the number of cards with endurance. So I find myself a lot more chasing that than I feel like I should.
What's a comfortable number for when you're looking at the number of cards in your deck with endurance?
I shoot for at least 20 in my decks. I like to at least have 20 cards with endurance. I don't really count the amount of endurance added up, but at least 20 cards. If I'm a Dragon Ball deck, I'll try to get as much endurance as I can in there. Hopefully, as much endurance as I can fit. Because if you're a ball deck, you don't want to be crit. If you're aggressive, you can, lower it, but at least around 20.
That's fair. Yeah, I do like to actually look for a fair amount of cards with endurance myself. It's not so much the amount, but more how it's spread, I think, is more important. Just the likelihood of knowing if I can stop a critical damage effect. And a lot of times I find myself, knowing when I go into events, like how many cards of endurance, and then I can find myself counting the piles that I'm going to take damage a lot of the time. I think it's a pretty big part. But I did do my questions in slightly wrong order. So I guess we're going to kind of almost backtrack in a sense, but like we were saying, it kind of does matter what you're playing. Where do you start when you are deck building? Do you start with the MP? Do you start with a specific combo? Are you looking at the mastery more? Is there anything that you really look at when you start to deck build, Erik?
Yeah, so not so much combos. In general, I'll start with the MP, and take a look at what the different levels do. If I'm going to be hitting different levels for the MP, then I'll look at the different levels for the MP first, and then try to find a mastery that matches up well with it. Definitely really, really look at synergy between the mastery and the personality. The more synergy between those two, the more likely I am probably to build.
Which do you
so
see
that's
yourself picking between more, the mastery or the MP?
I focus more. I focus more on the MP.
Okay.
But yeah, definitely look for synergies. That's one of the reasons why I've gravitated towards Namekian and Piccolo. Obviously, there's a ton of synergy there with the rejuvenation and the anger gain, and the Dragon Balls. So it's really the synergy that has kind of kept me with that deck for so long.
Yeah, definitely one of the first. I'd say the first. I think it was the best deck for at least the first 3 sets. I mean, people had an argument for Black Krillin in set 2 because Wallbreaker, specifically coming out, was huge. But I still think Namekian Piccolo is probably the best deck for the longest time. Henry, what about you? Where do you start? Are you kind of lean more in MP mastery? Which one would you say it's for you?
Well, I start anywhere, really. Like the other day, I was, I tend to, I obviously, Majin Buu is my favorite character. So if I can, I'll try to play a Buu deck. But usually I start wherever. Like if the other day I was looking at what's the blue energy push, and I was like, that's a cool card. With Mimicry, I can constantly shuffle it in. So, what can I use to make this the strongest as possible? Like what mill effect can I use? I'll start with something like that, like Red Healing Drill, like how can I abuse this? So, or a lot of time, most of the time, the combo is between like the MP and the mastery. Like what's another example? I played red commanding Raditz because that level 3 and commanding I thought synergized really well together. And yeah, like my brother said, I think the most important synergy though is definitely your mastery with your MP because cards are cool, but they're not always going to be in your hand. But your mastery and your MP are always going to be there. So I try to look for as much like synergy and combos as I can.
Interesting. Yeah, I do agree with that statement. If you don't have direct synergy between the mastery and MP, if a card's not going to be on the board, you can't really count on it in the game, and that's a lot of the reason why there's quite a few decks like our Unleash base, for example, that I'm like really like hesitant to like call good and really want to play. Cards that hinge way too much on drawing certain cards. I don't think are ever going to, and that's part of the reason why I think they're not as consistent. People don't hold them as competitive, but I still occasionally find myself guilty of making those decks. So, all right, well, we'll go on to the next question here. Henry, I'm going to have you answer this one first. Um, what kind? So, I mean, we did kind of cover, the kind of decks slightly, but what would you say are maybe some of your favorite decks? What do you ultimately prefer to build? You said you play everything, but is there a specific flavor that you have?
If I had to choose one thing, it would probably be just red. I like red a lot. I probably like ball and survival decks the most. I mean, I've played Ascension Trunks at a few of these tournaments. I played that in the what is it, Budokai. I played Ascension Trunks, but I really don't play that many MPPV decks. I tend to, like most people right now, survival. Um, but I tend to, you know, I build whatever if I wanna. If I think this is a good ball deck, I'll play that. And yeah, like I said, I like decks that have 2 win cons on paper. Like obviously, you want to have 2 ways to win in case one fails, but I find myself a lot of time having more success and enjoying decks that just go all in on one way of winning, even if you accomplish it in multiple ways.
Interesting. Interesting.
Exactly.
No, that's an interesting answer. The multiple ways, the same win condition. Interesting. Erik, I know we've talked a lot about the Namekian Piccolo, but so I'll try to see. Is there other stuff like the Namekian Piccolo, or other than Namekian Piccolo? Like, is there a type of way that you play your Namekian Piccolo that maybe is your preference?
Yeah, I mean, with Namekian Piccolo, I really like to have it focus on being a triple threat deck. So, I like to make sure there's the anger and the survival and the Dragon Ball victory. But yeah, there's other decks that I prefer to play more. I think Raditz is probably the most fun MP to play. I love Raditz. I love Sand Raditz. Really setup heavy Raditz decks, I think, are probably the most fun decks that I've ever built. Like Henry said, I also like red. I think it's a really it's a really overlooked style, and especially in our play group in Los Angeles, there's a lot of really good red players. Our friend Paul's like one of the best
Paul
red
Maria,
players, I think.
yeah.
And, yeah, and um, so I like it's fun to build different red decks because sometimes you find things that you haven't seen from other things. So
Interesting. Red's always had a bit of a soft spot for me. I started off really hard trying to like blue. I thought red was like OP and scoresy for me, so I actually really hated playing it. I felt kind of cheap playing it, but Red and Rage Tan was like my first favorite deck in the game. I think I was big on Blue Frieza. I liked Blue Piccolo set one, but Red and Rage Tan was my jam. And yeah, I've had some decent success with Red. I have a hard time. I have a hard time with it being consistent performing for me, but it has a lot of. I think it, in ways it is pretty overlooked. I would agree with that statement. That's interesting though. You have a lot. So you guys have a lot of players in your local scene that play Red. So who all is in your local scene? Since you guys are in LA, I don't really know the area out there.
yeah. So we've got a pretty good play group. We've got Ty. We've got Jake. We got Alex and Doug and Paul, as we mentioned, and Brian and Adrian and Jesus. And so, yeah, they've all, played with us and helped us, develop and challenged us. So they haven't been playing quite so much recently, but we're going to get them back into it. So
Solid, solid. Well, all right. Well, I think we'll move on to. Let's see. We have. So we kind of talked. I mean, Henry, I'll let you answer this one again first. We did talk about this very briefly. What do you think is something that you could work on for your deck building?
Oh yeah, like I mentioned, I'm big on endurance. Like with a lot of my decks, I'll be like, why would I take this card out? 3 endurance. That's a lot of endurance. So I'll find myself, like in my black decks that want to level up. There's black corruption and then there's black resistance. I'll find myself always running black resistance, but I really wish I could just get myself to cut cards that have endurance for cards that have less or no endurance. That's something. And I feel like something I want to work on is a lot of times I find the best thing to do with the deck is play a completely different variant of it. Like if I can't think of an exact example, but you get built into this, like pigeonhole of just making this deck work in one way. But I wish I could more often build it in a completely different way using a bunch of different cards, and then that helps you get a different view on a deck and eventually, build it sort of a mix between the two,
Mm-hmm.
and it gives you a new perspective. And I a lot of times have trouble, you know, giving up on one card and trying a whole different thing.
Interesting, interesting. Eric, what do you think?
that's what. Yeah, well, like Henry was saying, I mean, that's one of the big advantages of playing against someone who's built a deck that maybe you've built, but uh, they built it in a totally different way, and you can learn so much by doing that. And actually, Henry's the one who told me that. Who told me that. As far as like what I can work on with my deck building, it's definitely combos. I think right now, especially, there's a lot more combos. There's a lot of decks generating a lot more actions, and so that's something I need to explore more. I have to try to include that in my decks more, rather than just focusing on synergy between the MP and mastery, and then including strong cards that also have synergy with it. Really looking for those combos that can help me generate more actions during combat. I think that's where I can probably improve.
Yeah. Yeah, that is one thing I was gonna say because you guys both said you took off some time off the sets here. That was one thing is that there's just so many more combo cards that have come out in Fantasy. I feel like the game's become so draw dependent because of just the fact there's so many cards that are +2s, +3s, incredibly synergistic, versus a lot of the older cards don't necessarily have as much synergy. Which is like one of the things I was going to say I give you credit to is like the fact that you're still performing very well with Knowledge Piccolo when that card has got like no direct support for many sets. For most of Fantasy, there have not been many cards that I say are like game breaking by any means for that deck. So I thought I was going to say kudos to you for doing so well with it still, especially that first event that I think the one that you topped that I played in. I was surprised that you just did incredibly well during the Swiss of that tournament, if I remember right. So
Yeah, yeah, it's a resilient deck, and I think it's still the best triple threat deck out there, if not probably the only competitive triple threat deck out there. And so you can kind of, if you're playing against someone and they're not focusing on one of those win cons, you can kind of eke out a win there. So it can be a sneaky deck.
hmm. So I suppose we talked about what maybe we could work on. We'll kind of go into. Was there like a time? So we talked about a little bit about the whole idea of that trying to make decks differently and stuff too. Is there a time that you were building a deck that it came out surprisingly well? Like maybe you took that risk and you tried this. You tried a completely different formula for building the deck, or maybe you tried a combo and all of a sudden it was like super consistent, working really well. Was there anything that really surprised you? Either one of you guys, whichever you want to go first for this one.
I guess I'll go first. The first thing I guess that comes to my mind is I guess Commanding Garlic Jr. I love Garlic Jr. and I like him a lot. He's cool. I remember in Pan Z for like the first 3 sets, I only played one deck, and I finally tried Garlic Jr. and I like that a lot. And I was waiting. The new Masteries came out. I don't know what set it was. Fusion. The new Masteries came out, and I was like, one of these has got to be good with Garlic Jr. He's got to have a good deck in here. And I mean, I don't think it's like a competitive deck, but I tried it out, and the deck's actually, I think, definitely the best Garlic Jr. deck. And if you play against a ball deck, you're sure to win. And it actually is really good synergy because you can level yourself down in case you're getting close to getting onto the,
Level 4.
just terrible garbage heap of level 4.
Man.
And you can control your anger to prevent you from getting to level 4. And it's actually a really good dual threat because it hardly ever wins by DBV, but your opponent thinks that the only way for you to win is by Dragon Ball Victory, but you just swoop in there and, beat him down with your, life card attacks.
Yeah, no, I could see that. It sounds really cool. I've heard about it long ago. Many months ago, I remember hearing somebody was running Commanded Garlic. So I think that's super. I think he's a super cool stack. It's just that level 4 is so awful. That 2 and the 4 are the weak spots. 2 could be so hit and miss. If he had new level 4, I think he'd be viable. But he also gets poo-pooed on by like Wallbreaker, and of course he like starts the game at level 2 almost like Trunks. So I don't know. Interesting. That's a cool deck. I'd have to. I want to build it now that you said it.
It's really fun. I mean, it's not competitive, but it's actually surprisingly good for a Garlic Jr. deck.
And then I guess I'll piggyback on that. Do you have a deck that maybe was like a fail that didn't turn out very well? Like you thought it was going to do good on paper and it just kind of crapped out?
Yes. Recently, what was it? Was Mimicry Supreme Kai. I was so happy about that. Like, I was like, this is my greatest creation yet. This is excellent. I thought it was really going to be great with the ball, Mimicry Supreme Kai, and I ran the Dragon Balls, and I just chilled on level 1, and it was not very good. I could get close to winning, but it's just not there. Like every game I would feel pretty good about it, and then I would just lose because I thought it was going to be great. I could shuffle all these cards in. I could throw blue punishment and stuff to always kill my opponent. And, it lacks a little bit of way to control the Dragon Balls, a little bit of way to control your allies, and it lacks a little bit of damage. If it had those 3 things, I think it would be good. But, I mean, maybe that's just because where blue is right now. But I was really happy about that deck. I thought it was going to be, really great. And it was not. It disappointed me.
Just doesn't do Survivaler Ball well enough.
Yeah, it needs a little bit more of a push.
It's kind of how I feel about Mimicry in general. Like, it got better. I've seen some interesting Mimicry decks that like really surprised me, but like I look at them and I'm kind of like, I'm like if I was playing a good deck, like would I lose to this? Maybe. I don't know. Yeah, I really do feel like Blue Ball and Blue Ally are just like Blue Ally can work, but like it just is like, Stylish Pose being gone really hurt it.
It's not there right now. It doesn't have enough support that really works.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting deck. Now I kind of want to build that one too, especially playing Erik Ing on. You know what I'm talking about. I won't spoil his sauce, but
that's where I got the inspiration for. I was talking to him, and I don't know who else, and someone mentioned that, and I was like, "That is a Supreme Kai will be great." And it disappointed.
Yeah, there's a real lack of Supreme Kai at the UOP. Budokai Tenkaichi was interesting. A lot of lack of Raditz and Supreme Kai. Interesting. So Erik, what about you? What was a deck that you felt came together really well, surprisingly, and then also maybe a deck that didn't come together that you thought should have?
Yeah, so of course I've kind of beat this to death, but ever since I just kind of randomly threw together Namekian Piccolo during set 2, it's been pretty competitive. But that's mostly just Piccolo, probably not, really what I'm doing. But I built some other pretty good decks. Like Henry helped me build a really good the red Vegeta deck that I mentioned, Majin Vegeta deck that I mentioned before. That was really good for a set or 2. It just had a really good way of handling everything from drills to setups and really getting into combat and dishing out a lot of damage. Um, and I've built a couple of decent Saiyan decks in the past, um, and yeah, but nothing really specific comes to mind, to be honest.
Oh, that's fair. Um, how about for this question then? So you taking a break and being a knowledge Piccolo player, coming back, maybe what was like, just to get maybe more in depth, what were some of the cards that you were looking at and like threw in and tried out, as you kind of readjusted the game?
Yeah, well, some of the things that I looked at that I thought would be really good. One of them was Woof, and I was running that card for a while because I thought this is great. This can help me deal with Wallbreaker or anything else that comes along. I ended up removing it from the deck pretty much just because it's not a Namekian card, so just it just didn't
Yeah.
have that last little bit of synergy um, that it needed. And then what else? Let's see. I don't know. Henry, help me out here.
Well, I remember because we came back. I don't know. Was it set 11? It might have been. I think set 12 is when we came back.
Yeah.
And I remember, we just pulled our old decks out, and you just played Namekian Piccolo, and you just tossed in those lethal chops, and then, that was
Yeah.
a good card
Yeah,
when
lethal.
for that
Man.
deck, and the new level 3 too.
Yeah, both those cards are pretty slapping. Not gonna lie. I love lethal chop. I've come to love that card so much. Playing red Piccolo. So, but how about a deck? So you have been on the Piccolo train. Obviously, you've tried some other decks that probably didn't work out. What was something that didn't work out too well that you thought would be a little bit better, Eric?
Yeah, so I've built a lot of crappy decks. I mean, the one that really comes to
Yeah.
mind, this is a long time ago at Score Z, and I was, probably younger than Henry, like 14 years old, and I built this. I don't remember what the mastery was called, but I built this blue trunks deck, and I was like, oh, this is so good. So I took it to Comic Con and pretty much got my ass kicked. And
That was like Blue Trunks ball, like a Cell Saga ball or something, or
yeah, it was something like that. And so, the moral of the story there was, I was just trying to do too much with the deck. It was this freestyle deck, and I just had all these cards in there. They were all really good cards, but it just didn't really have the synergy. And that's the
yeah.
thing that I didn't really get when I was, really young trying to play the game. So, now I'm like the polar opposite, always looking for synergy.
Mm.
But that was probably my biggest deck building fail.
Interesting that you said that you're looking for the synergy because that does tie into the thing that you felt you were weakest at is looking for more combos. But part of that could be because of taking the time off. But I mean, I thought that was interesting. You've gotten better, but you're still wanting to improve on the same thing. Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, I will say this. As far as something that I personally work on, I am a kind of a sucker for endurance like Henry, and I've made plenty of decks that try to run low block counts. And it wasn't until recently that, like, with a lot of these more freestyle Omni or these really strong Omni blocks came out, that I was able to actually make some decks that were good that ran few blocks. Um, I would always try to like load endurance to make up for not having blocks, would just get shit on. And but I think one of my biggest deck wins was probably just making Knowledge Dende. I mean, pretty simple, but that deck came out like super smooth. Um, just combos really stupidly, can get really degenerate with just like the setup alone. Like that's all you really need to be degenerate, and then you just add on Namekian synergy. It's super great. Um, Deck winning fail, I would say, is like, oh man, I've tried to make oppressive Goku, like non-drill version. Like I have like a version that uses the drill Ku 4, does like kind of like sword, not really like so much sword, but you just kind of control beady. It's really cool. And that deck worked fine, but then I tried to just make one like no, Jesus, didn't he qualify? I think, I don't know if you guys were playing, but I think he qualified running oppressive Goku um,
Yeah.
last
That
year.
was right when we got back. Yeah.
Yeah, and like I've tried to make that deck, and it just doesn't work for me. Like it's too caveman face roll. It feels like I just never quite get the auto levelers the way that I want them. When I've played that, and I've just kind of gotten dumped on. Same thing with like anything rampaging almost entirely, other than Go tanks. I cannot build rampaging decks that are good at all. So like I don't know, just incapable of building on stuff. I guess we'll add on a little final question, but now since you guys did take a break and you came back, what do you think of this? You kind of like how do you feel about the game? What would you really want to see added to it to maybe make it more enjoyable for you?
I guess
So I
I'll go
think right,
first.
go ahead.
All right. Well, coming back, one thing I noticed was I think the games, in my opinion, I mean, besides the lack of, the huge player base and all that, which in sometimes is better, but the game's a lot more fun. You can like really bring to a tournament whatever deck you want, like, and still you could still do pretty good with, you know, pretty bad decks. It used to be in Panini, like, you played Knowledge Cell, you played Saiyan Broly, you played Namekian Piccolo, like there were like 2 or 3 decks that would do well and everything else would pretty much just lose. And I hated that. I would love to just build these really weird decks.
Yeah.
And I find in Fanzy, especially right now, like you can just play such a vast, sea of decks and they all pretty much do really well. I guess I'll let my brother say what he was going to say.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Henry's saying right now. There's so much diversity in the meta, and I really feel like there's more a wider range of competitive decks really than there's ever been. So that's really really cool. It's hard to keep up with trying to get back into it. And it's like all these different decks, and I got to learn what they all do. I got to do a lot of reading. Um, but so I think the game's really, really kind of at a high point right now. The one thing I guess I would be remiss without saying, I know everyone in our play group is a little concerned about the Unleashed nerf because they think that that's probably going to limit certain personalities and because Unleashed is something that can keep certain personalities in the game where otherwise they wouldn't really be playable. So
Yeah.
they're a little bit concerned about that, and that could potentially limit the number of decks that are and MPs that are competitive. So I will say that.
Yeah, I can agree with pretty much everything you guys said. I think people, while I may not like the complete imbalance in the game, how fast and like one-sided the games really can feel like they are at times, with how I think like what's good is so polarizing and how good it is. It's like either super doesn't let you do anything or super doesn't let you do anything because we're killing you fast. Um, Despite that, there are versus Pansy, like I felt, yeah, it felt incredibly restrictive in Pansy. It felt like there were so few decks that were good at a time. Certain sets maybe being the exception, but there was very brief periods of time where multiple things were viable in a competitive sense. And I do really enjoy how open and broad it is. There really just seems to be a lot of decks that are pretty good. That maybe they're not the best deck, but like if you're not tech for them, you can be, they can win a lot of games. And I also do really think um, just yeah, overall the game's just more fun um, than it was in Pansy. So I do agree with that. But yeah, it's there's a lot of decks. There's so many decks I haven't even explored that like look fun. Good example was like TJ ran Mischievous Bobbity, which is like a deck that people were like super like excited about when set 11 dropped when they saw Bobbity stack and they thought Bobbity and Mistress were gonna be so good together that like nobody played it. There are multiple reasons for that, but OPA going to limit one and stuff. But overall, I do like. I still, I have had some discussions about it. I still enjoy the game, but it's hard to play it for. I mean, it's fun. It can be fun, but like, man, some of those losses are the losses nowadays are just really fucking devastating because they're just some of them are just really just blowouts. Like I enjoy building the game, but actually playing it maybe not as much as I don't know. It's weird. I'm saying
It
all
can
this
be really one-sided. Yeah.
I'm saying all this contradictory stuff. It's tough. It's tough. Some games feel fun, but yeah, just the boom bust makes it tough. Maybe because I haven't played for like a week now, I'm feeling okay about the game, but we'll see. Let me start playing games again. But
Yeah, I've started to enjoy the game less since Henry's gotten really good. It's frustrating playing against him. I hate it. It's just every time I play him, like the way he kicks my ass really pisses me off. So that's very frustrating. I hate being like stressed out. Like
Yeah.
Henry, I got outplayed by Henry again. It used to
Yeah.
never happen. Now it happens all the time. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I'll get him back.
I watched the end of you guys' Tenkaichi game, and I watched the end of that one. That was interesting. Holding the ball
That was fun.
hold the ball one over the Maxwell. Rest in peace.
Yeah.
My only good win of the day.
Yeah. Well, guys, I really appreciate it. Again, thanks for coming out, hitting me up. My life's kind of going nuts, so I was kind of telling Erik about everything with the COVID stuff has hit me pretty hard, but I do really appreciate you guys coming on. I think it's great to have you guys kind of have a platform to express stuff, and hopefully, I do see you guys on Octagon. Maybe you'll start doing some gameplay and recording and stuff. But I really appreciate that you guys got back into it. It's nice to see both of you doing incredibly well too for just coming back in like the last set. That's awesome.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, well, thanks for the opportunity. It's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'm gonna sign off for the video, but yeah, just there's more Deck Daddy stuff. I hope to be doing some more of this stuff and highlight some more players. If anybody really wants to get on one, maybe I'll try to, if you message me, I'll try to get you in one. But anyway, guys, take it easy. Peace.
See ya.
And